Welcome back. There are different types of outsourcing, and there are different factors actually on the basis of which the outsourcing can be classified. Based on the Kralji's matrix that we discussed in the previous segment, we can classify the sourcing process into three categories. The first one is strategic sourcing. So this is a comprehensive approach for locating and sourcing key materials suppliers. So this is done for key materials or strategic items or rare materials or expensive components or the components or the parts that require specialized technology. So here a focus is on the development of long-term relationships with trading partners who can help the purchaser meet profitability and customer satisfaction goals. So this strategic sourcing can increase the buyer's competitive advantage and or reduce its risk. Strategic sourcing by its nature is more costly and time-consuming process, but in the long run, it pays back the buying organization. But in the beginning, it requires a lot of effort, a lot of sort of meetings and negotiations with the suppliers. And it may sometimes involve the development of the suppliers. So a lot of cost is incurred in the beginning, but in the long run, it pays back to the buying organization. So it is very common, for example, in computer manufacturing organizations, big names you know, and for automotive manufacturing organizations. So strategic sourcing requires collaboration throughout the organization. So different departments within the buying organizations have to be involved. For example, if the supplier is being involved in the design and development, and so not only the purchasing department, but the design and development and quality department have to be involved as well. The second type of sourcing is what is called sourcing management. Sourcing management is used when risk is high, but the material's profit impact is low or moderate, that is the bottleneck items. So I hope you remember risk hedging supply chain from the first module where we discussed that for some organizations, the material that is being used or the components or raw materials that are being used are not easily available. So organizations need to have some backup sources of supply or some cushion to address the uncertainty in supply. So demand is certain, demand is known, but supply is evolving or uncertain. So such organizations go for risk hedging. So the approach in sourcing management is similar to strategic sourcing. And here as well, a preferred list of suppliers or approved list of suppliers may be created. The goals are to secure materials as reliably as possible at the best total cost of ownership. We will discuss in the second lecture what is meant by total cost of ownership. But in short, the TCO not only considers the purchase price, but also the life cycle cost of the purchased item. Leveraging competition among suppliers means that relationships may be shorter if they are, if you are going for backup suppliers and you're having more suppliers, then eventually you might not be able to have long-term relations with suppliers here in contrast to the strategic sourcing. Unlike the strategic sourcing relationship, the purchasing organization and the supplier are less integrated, but may still collaborate to create value. So level of relationship depends upon the volume of business and the time frame in future that both organizations are willing to work for. The third type of sourcing is tactical buying. The purchasing process focused on transactions and non-strategic material buying for non-critical and leverage items with respect to Kraljic matrix. Unlike strategic sourcing, which involves establishing long-term relationships, tactical buying is transaction-based. Tactical buying situations are characterized by the following conditions. There are many competing suppliers, which creates room for bidding. The products have standard specifications the functional products with respect to Fisher's matrix, and are available at comparable and reliable levels of quality. Material requirements have stable usage rates and predictable schedules. So ultimate goal is here to go for the smooth delivery of the items with least cost possible. So this is the summary comparison of the strategic sourcing and tactical buying. I hope you could go through this matrix. So this is the summary as a whole that we have discussed based on 5 factors: price, service, quality, technology, and market trends. So there is an important question. What type of supply chain does a supplier need if it is supplying non-critical or leverage items? The items that are having low supply risk. What type of process should it have? So this question is with respect to different types of supply chains that we discussed in the first module. So for non-critical and leverage items that are having low supply risk, what type of supply chain is appropriate? So we discussed 4 types of supply chains in module 1, and I hope you remember that the supply chains that are having low supply uncertainty, that is a low supply risk, are efficient supply chain and responsive supply chain. So the organization that is supplying these non-critical and leverage items might be looking for efficient supply chain, and if demand uncertainty is a little higher, than a responsive supply chain. And I hope you recall the characteristics of these types of supply chains from first. And what type of supply chain does a supplier need if it is supplying bottleneck or strategic items? That is the items that are having high supply risk. And again, when supply uncertainty is high, we are having risk hedging supply chains and agile supply chains. So such organization might be looking for either of these 2 types of supply chain. And what is the level of supplier's power in each of the 4 item categories? From this Porter's model, for these 2 types of items, strategic and bottleneck, the power of supplier will be high. And for non-critical and leverage items, the bargaining power of buying organization will be high. So far, we have discussed 3 types of sourcing based on Kraljik's matrix. So we saw strategic sourcing, we saw sourcing management, and we saw tactical buying. And we try to relate these types of sourcing with the Kraljik's matrix. There is another way to classify types of sourcing, and that is sole sourcing, multiple sourcing, and single sourcing. In sole sourcing, only one supplier is available because of patents, technical specification, raw material, location, and so forth. So buying organization doesn't have any option but to select that supplier. Just the opposite is multiple sourcing. More than one supplier is available for an item. The potential advantages of multiple sourcing are that competition will result in lower price and better service, and that there will be a continuity of supply. So it is more applicable to non-critical and leverage items. Organizations generally go for bidding for such items, and that is for multiple. Single sourcing is a planned decision by the organization to select one supplier for an item where several sources are available. It is intended to produce long-term partnership. It is more applicable to bottleneck and strategic item, but it does imply risk. Even if there are long-term agreements between the 2 organizations, any disruption in the supply can cause serious problems. And we have seen some examples in the recent past as well. So it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of planning. And as a general rule, there needs to be some backup source of supply, and single sourcing should be avoided. But in certain cases, some organizations go for single sourcing. In the next segment, we will discuss some criteria and methods for supplier selection. Thank you very much.